delighted to have with us for this conference, Dr. Akilah Martin. Akilah Martin is first and foremost in partnership with soil and water. Akilah earned her BS degree in soil science from Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical University and her doctorate from Purdue University in agricultural and biological engineering. Her professional interests include enhancing relationships of individuals and communities to environmental and natural resources. Her teaching and scholarly research interests are centered in soil and water quality in urban communities. Current projects include food sovereignty, Chicago Grows Food, Advocates for Urban Ag, life expectancy and health inequalities, installing rain gardens to create a sponge town, and building container gardens for growing your own groceries. Akilah is abundantly living life through two core values, freedom and joy. To that end, she is also a certified coach specializing in building vibrant relationships. Her website is amrootbuilders.com. Akilah, thank you for being with us for this event.
Thank you.
You know, I get really excited about what you're doing because seeing another academic bringing expertise into the public sector, and well, that in itself is really, really important. And then when I hear you talk about yourself as a soil coach, I get really excited because that to me is the kind of approach that is gonna save human life on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chara. I really appreciate the time, the space that we're making to have this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So talking about the way that we treat soil, our relationship to soil, it's a microcosm for humans and Earth in general, what's going on for people and the planet. And so I'd love it if you would just start by talking however you want to about how you see the soil human connection and what we need to be doing right now with soil care, and then we'll connect that to how soil care is also people care.
Yeah, no, I love how you say soil care. That's really great. So I think for soil, I mean, for many of us who may not have ever seen soil in its truest form or rarest form or naturalist form, especially if you live in urban settings where there's nothing but asphalt and concrete and, you know, buildings, it's a whole other world, whole other complex world filled with billions of entities that are living their best lives, right? And for me, the interconnectedness of soil and, you know, us as humans is so important and so essential for us to understand, mainly because, I mean, the soil does everything that we need it to do, right? If you did not live in an urban setting and you live more in a rural setting, you would rely on the soil to filter your water, right, for you to drink. So one part of that is understanding what the soil profile does. What do those organisms in the soil do? What are those entities, those chemicals, those elements, those particles that, and so on and so forth? What do they do in the soil to help impact that water filtration? Other parts is that if you taking any vitamins or any antibiotics or any medications, most of those are coming from the soil, from the organisms that live in the soil. And most importantly, if you eat anything, fruits, vegetables, I mean, they're grown in the soil, most likely. I mean, we know we do. They have air gardens, they have hydroponics and aquaponics. At the end of the day, the soil is what's plentiful and what's available and what we use profoundly for what we call farming. And I just want to make it clear that farming is not a natural thing. It's not a natural system. It's something that we created to basically provide food for people on this earth. Now, we've had some miseducation about farming and agriculture, you know, of course, over the years, and hopefully we're all trying to reimagine what that looks like, which is, you know, what we're talking about, the grow your own groceries. And I invite you to check that out. I did not create that. That is a colleague of mine, Orrin Williams, created that in his position as food systems coordinator here in Chicago. But we've taken that on and created some grow bags. We know that COVID has taken a huge toll on people and communities, on their food consumption and their needs and desires and wants to be able to sustain life. And so a group of people here in Chicago created the Chicago Grows Food, which Chara wrote, she read to you earlier in my bio. We created what we call these grow bag kits, where we gave people a container, which in this instance, the container was a grow bag that you can purchase, or you can use any bag that you have in your home that's porous. And we put some soil in there, and we gave them either a seed start or some seeds. It just depended on, what was available at the time. And we said, here, take this home with your families, your friends, your community, grow it. And then at the end of the day, after that, watch it grow, observe it, give it love, nourish it, then eat it, and then continue to cycle. And so, we didn't just send people home with just a grow bag kit. We gave them some guidance, of course, on, how to care for it, what it was, what's needed for it to continue to grow. And we even had cooking demos so that people can see what you can do with different things that we were providing, just trying to, expand people's appetite as well as their palates for consuming different things. There's lots of narratives around food that many of us may not know because we just don't necessarily do our homework, and we rely on what they provide to us in a grocery store, which is very limited if you think about the number of varieties of different foods that we eat. We're only being served one, and there's thousands of varieties of greens and fruits and things of that nature that we don't even know about. And so, that disconnect that we have is becoming very apparent. And so that's one of our goals, is to try to make that reconnection in a way that's smooth, of course, and gentle, because we do know that, farming and agriculture does have some definite harm and injury to certain groups of people that are on this earth. So we want to make sure that we are using progressive language in a way that's gentle and soft to say, that reconnection to the earth and how important it is for us to know that oneness is real. And, what we do to the soil here impacts what happens to the soil on another continent, because it is all interconnected. And so I'll stop there because I feel like I was just going on, Chara. But
no, that was really helpful. And I think that the Chicago Grows Food program is really exciting because I'm sure it's not yet on the scale that you would like to see or is needed, but it's a doable, achievable way to begin and do this work.
Yep.
I guess I'm curious about a number of things, like what do people say? How's it going?
No, good.
What do you think is next?
We're actually in planning right now to figure out what is next, because we gave out thousands of kits last year. So we gave it out to different community events as well as schools. So we have a lot of connections with people that are a part of our collective, is what I want to call it, that are connected with different Chicago public schools and other schools, not just the public schools, but any of the schools in the city. So where we would, get in contact with the principals and some of the teachers there to provide the grow bags to them for their kids, for their learners, for their students, to be able to do the activity with them so they can do it and, in the learning space if they wanted that. But I think the hardest part, of course, is the whole supply part, right? Of getting that all together, assembling that grow kit together. That's probably the most difficult part of that, just the energy that's needed to get that done. The easiest part is actually interacting with the community, right? So when we talk about it, everybody's excited because we know what can happen once you touch soil, once you see something grow, right? You're part of that life cycle that happens, watching it grow. We had some feedback. We have a research project that has tangentially spawned off of that, around like thinking about like what do people want, what do communities want, and so that's kind of why I made the statement about our narratives around food. So we had some communities tell us that like what we were giving is not something that they felt was culturally appropriate. And I think one of the things was like kale, right? And I don't think, I know people have different thoughts about what kale is and who quote unquote eats it, but kale is really from the continent of Africa, right? So, and it's awesome when you eat it over there. It's okay over here, but we do different things to our food here that I won't necessarily, talk about so much in this interview, because I'm sure you all know that. But just listening to people say that, it was, for me, I felt like that was a moment that we can step in and say, well, hey, well, it may not be culturally appropriate because, we know that you want this, you want that, and we can definitely step up to the plate to do that. But here's an opportunity to expand, as I said earlier, palate, and here's some other things you can do with this particular vegetable or fruit or whatever it is that we're providing to the community, so that people can start to see that, we do need to have other nutrients come in and not just from the same things that we're eating over and over again. But we were thinking about what do we want to do this year? Because, what we provided was what we could get, right? It wasn't that we were trying to not be culturally appropriate. It's just what was available. And it was really hard to get seeds last year. And so we are definitely starting early now to figure out, what do we want to do? What's going to, yield us the best results so that we can actually, further people's food sovereignty in our communities here in Chicago.
How does this initiative connect either right now in action or in your desire and imagination to the idea of a sponge town? So I ask that because, these are not my areas of expertise, although I understand well what you're talking about. But I know one initiative here in Philadelphia has been to handle stormwater with planters, soil-filled above-ground planters. And I'm not quite clear on the extent to which Philadelphia has encouraged that those be for growing food. But anyway, tell us about Spongetown, Chicago Grows Food. Are those linked up? Could they be linked up?
I wouldn't say that they are deliberately linked up, but they are in my mind, in my vision of how I see things. And so Chicago is, we're on the floodplain. We have the huge, Lake Michigan. And so many of our homes flood, especially when we have these huge storm events. And one of the things that I thought about was, what can we do to help stave that off? Because the natural lay of the land is for it to flood. It's supposed to, it's a wetland, right? That's what it's supposed to do. And so how do we in turn react to that? And so that we aren't always having to pay the price for flooding, because water is beautiful, and it also can cause some damage in your home. And so we want to make sure that people understand what that looks like, and provide different ways and tools for them to do things that aren't necessarily going to come out of the pocket for, expensive, because it's expensive to get, a towel drain put in your home, in your basement.
Yes.
And so, so one of the things is, you can install a rain garden, which is basically a retention center that you could put, on your side yard, backyard, front yard, wherever that you have seen where you may see some water ponding, or basically when I say that means, you see standing water that could actually enter your home. So you could plant a garden basically. And what we would encourage is that, you think about the pollinators, right? So we want to make sure that whatever we're planting will create not just for you to protect your home, but also a haven for other entities to be able to live their best lives, right? And then you also have an opportunity to beautify your home aesthetically, right? And then you also have an opportunity to diversify the species that can come back to the urban setting that were once driven out because of our activities in urban centers. And one of the things that since COVID has happened, because Chicago Grows Food kind of born out of this COVID thing, it was in response to like, what can we do right now to help people, have food in their homes? Yeah. So it hasn't been so much physical and, face-to-face action, and, building rain gardens require physical labor in groups. So I haven't been able to do any of that so far, but I would love to get back out there. That's what we were doing before COVID started, helping people build rain gardens. So however many people that would be interested in doing that, I would love to work with people to continue that, because any way that we can help support our stormwater actually going into the soil profile is most helpful. We don't want it to run off. We want it to penetrate because we need our groundwater, right? You all buy bottled water. They supposedly get bottled water from the groundwater, which is, precipitation going through the soil profile and filtering out so that they can tap into it through a well to fill up these water bottles. So we want to make sure that we are capturing all of this precipitation that we can. So, and through that way, we can do that through rain gardens.
Yeah.
So.
I love that you mentioned the native pollinators and birds, and there's of course room for native plants in rain gardens too, because
yes, exactly. Yes.
It's all about relationship, right?
It is.
People to people, people to soil, people to the water, to the insects, to the prairie ecosystem that you're living in, and other ecosystems elsewhere.
Yes.
How do you, that can get kind of philosophical and spiritual. But then it's very practical in what you're doing. How do those come together for you? Like, do you find that the practical and the spiritual or the philosophical fit together well in the way that you see, or do they feel like they're in kind of separate realms?
I think that's a really good question. For me, I feel like in the beginning, when I first started, when I was an undergrad and I chose soil science, it was very much then just practical. Like, hey, this could potentially yield a nice paying gig and I could do some really good work. And as I began to move away from there and I was on the other side of that, which I was a facilitator of learning and, in the learning space, then I started to read differently, right? I started to read different things and hear different things and attend different events to be able to really understand what does soil really mean? Not just the science aspect of it, but maybe even the art aspect of it. And for me now, it's very much spiritual. It is in a sense still scientific for me, but that part is not what I enjoy teaching, if you will. It's more about the part of us connecting with the soil. When you smell it, when you touch it, when you see it, and you see all the organisms that are living, the ones that you can't see, of course, because there are billions of them that you can't see without a microscope. Being able to see what's happening and you see what's above the surface, right? What's growing from that soil, from that media. For me, it becomes like, wow, okay, this is amazing. Even in my own yard, just being able to see the evolution of what's happening based off what I'm planting, based off my own energies, just my own physical presence being there, what's attracted to me. I saw my first hummingbird in my own yard last summer, and it was just, I was so excited. For me, it was like, and I wasn't quick enough to get a picture, but it was just for me that I felt it through my whole body and my spirit, like, wow, okay, so obviously something I'm putting out there. So now I'm all excited, like, what am I going to do this year, for my garden? Like, what am I going to plant? How am I going to plant it? So it's just so many things for me. I think for other people that feel like they have that moment where they see something growing and they see something coming, that's attracted to them, that's when people start getting really excited about it. And they become curious, right? And so I'm just trying to help people find that spark, because that's what it takes to really get people on this, on this advocacy role and advocacy to action. Like, okay, I'm loving this. I'm loving nature. I'm loving understanding what's happening, watching the trees. Because, in an urban setting, the trees are really up to us as as homeowners to take care of them. So, yep.
Yeah. I heard everything you said, but a part of my mind also was getting really emotional thinking about how I wish that the academic classroom space where you used to teach in higher ed could welcome all of what you said, because I know you were trained as a scientist, and when you were in higher ed, you taught as a scientist, and there's a lot of validity to that. But wouldn't it be amazing if that whole picture of life and spirituality and the unity of people and the soil and all the creatures, if that also fit in what we're teaching to young people?
Yes. Char, I had a chance to do some real creative outside the box courses.
Yeah.
And I was thankful for that because I didn't have to stay in that scientific realm. And it's for a lot of different reasons. And this last course I taught last year is called Soil, Song, and Sustenance. Oh my God, it was amazing. Just having the opportunity for students to look at soil from a more artistic perspective, and as well as mirroring that with a scientific approach. And then also thinking about it from their own individual approach to it. So what's in their yards, what's happening with their soil? How do we put that all together? And I saw the 20 students that were in that course evolve over that time, how much they just started going outside more, started observing more, began to ask questions that they never even thought they even had in their mind to ask. I think that's the most beautiful part of, facilitating learning, is the curiosity that the learners bring back once they find that connection.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. That course sounds amazing. So do you want to talk more? I'm thinking about this aspect of how the way that we can be careless and much worse with the soil and the earth. It's also, I think, often the mirror image of how we're treating one another and other people. And there have been a number of philosophers and ethicists and spiritual teachers who've pointed this out to us. I hope that we're getting more consciousness about this as humans, that reverence for life is reverence for life, and abuse of life is abuse of life.
Yes.
So
yes.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can. Let me see, where would I start?
Yeah, I know.
So I think about, and I know I can be an offender too for certain things because of how we've been conditioned to view life, and not even just your life, but others' lives, right? So if you haven't had an opportunity to be a part of nature, so I was a part of nature in the womb, right? My mother was always gardening. She always had a garden. She's always been into the sciences. She was a science coach. So I already had it in, right? She was always that outdoor person. She always wanted to be a part of that. And so it just seemed like the natural progression for me to be a part of, Earth, as far as education wise goes. And so me thinking about how I treat the soil, the water, the earth, the resources, so have you, I think about that and how that was always part of my upbringing, right? And in my own spirituality, my own values, my own morals of how I view the earth. Not everybody views it that way because that may not be a priority for them. They don't see it that way, and they may not have seen the earth be beneficial to them. And I don't know how that could be, but if your life is all focused on just surviving and not thriving, how can you have an opportunity to love the earth in a way that it can be, right? And so that you can actually get that reciprocity from the earth. And so I feel like we're so disconnected from what the earth does for us that we don't even have the opportunity to love it enough to take care of it. I mean, and what does that mean, to take care of it? Well, it means a lot of different things. It means, do we want to keep building new residential buildings, new office buildings? Do we want to do more solar energy? Do we want to do more, doing coal? Do we want to keep driving these cars? I mean, it's so many different things. And the constant things that we see is to buy, get new. This is the new product. This is the new thing. I need to jump on it. And we don't have an opportunity to reflect on what was back there, right? And I know I'm I do it too, because we all do it, right? And I stop myself sometimes to think about it and say, well, what's another journey, another path that I can take to that? And so I find myself ensuring that I talk to people that love the earth as I do so that I can hear how they are loving the earth. Because most people see, soil as dirt, as filth, and it's really just our filth, right? It's our filth because the soil is everything that we put in there, because you can't create matter, you can't destroy it. So whatever's in the soil is whatever we are, and whatever we are is in the soil. And so once we understand that, I think that opens up the aspect of, okay, so what should I be doing? Like, how can I care for not just the soil, but just anything outside, in your home and outside your home? And how can you take care of yourself? Because most importantly, what are you putting into your body, right? What are the energies that you are consuming? What are the things you're eating? What are the things you're drinking? Who are you surrounding yourself with? What's your community like? How are the children in your community? They give you that barometer. They let you know what's happening, right? And if people aren't looking healthy, obviously there's something going on with the soil, something going on with the plants, and something's going on with the animals. And now it's something going on with the air, right? Because I know everybody in Chicago just about got asthma. So something's going on. And so how do we combat that with all the other competing priorities of life? So, how do we raise the profile of the earth so that it's number one? And every day when I do my singing bowl, I ask that we all of us as people on this earth, make decisions with the earth in mind. That's what I ask for every day, 7 days a week, every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Because making decisions with the earth in mind is making decisions with everyone in mind.
Exactly. Yep. That harmony, that empathy, that love. I learned a new phrase on, what is it? Boundless love, where you love it because it's there. There is no limitations to it. There are no conditions. It's there because I'm there, and I'm there, and it's there. So
yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. What do you tell people who are curious about this connection that you have to soil and nature, and maybe they have lived in an urban setting for a long time, and it's very unfamiliar to step into that?
It is. I think one of the things that I was able to enable people in the formal learning setting was actually having them bring soil to the learning space. And, of course, I had my own soil. I would bring it the first day and have people actually touch it, right? Because most people, people buy, I don't call it soil. They buy grow media at the store, right? So because they sell potting soil, they sell topsoil, they sell compost, they sell all these other stuff, right? And that's like a whole nother
plastic bag.
Right, exactly. I said that's a whole nother conversation about buying soil. So having them touch the soil and smell it. Some people are scared, of course, and I get it, because not everybody likes bugs and things. They don't know what's happening. I get it. But I think that first, like, touching it and feeling that life force, because soil has life force. It is a living thing, whether we agree up to it or not. I feel like it's a living thing. People have an opportunity to see, okay, what's next? And then when I have them do different activities with it that are very much connected to their livelihoods, right? So like we build a water filter, which is a survival skill, right? I think then it starts to become like, okay, so I really need to start thinking about, what does this mean when I see this color soil here or this texture of soil there? And when I see this growing here and growing there, what does that mean? What does that tell me about the soil? So those are the type of thoughts I try to get people to think about as they go on their regular daily lives. I know people aren't able to do the same thing they did 2 years ago, but back then we were able to move around a little bit more freely. And so people were able to, do more observations.
Yeah, and just to kind of become familiar with this substance that gives us all life and food, and that we totally ignore, and we pave and we pollute, and then we call it dirty or filthy or
right.
Ooh, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in rebuilding that human soil relationship.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people who are with this whole movement of food sovereignty and people doing the urban gardens. I think we have a lot more people that are trying to understand soil, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's complex. It's a lot to understand about soil if you're trying to get down and dirty, of course. But superficially, it's not too much complexity to it. It's just really being able to be one with the soil so that you can read the signs, right? Read the energies of what's needed, and and not necessarily adding things that are not helpful to the
I know,
soil.
that's what I was thinking just now was, well, first of all, don't put chemicals on it.
Exactly.
And second of all, try to keep it covered, but not with concrete and asphalt.
Exactly. Yep. And, just, having people see that. And I feel like people are learning that, how important it is for us to protect, for lack of a better word, to protect our resources, because they're finite. And if we don't protect them now, what is our expectation for the future? So,
yeah. So when you describe yourself as a soil coach, have we talked about all of the pieces of that, or are there others too? I mean, I know you're also a life coach.
Yeah, I feel like, so I was working, I have a young lady who does a lot of the social media stuff for me. And so she's one of the people who I have to constantly explain to her about soil, because she doesn't get it. And so she created a challenge for me to be able to articulate what that means. And so I finally had to tell her, I was like, well, I do coach people around soil. And at the moment I was telling her that, I meant like, I do consultations with people, and people ask me questions about what's happening with their soil, whether their house plants, the indoor plants, or, outside in the garden. I provide that, that advice to people. I've done 8 million presentations, several thousand different activities with different people, different of all ages. So in my mind, I'm coaching people, right? Yeah. And so I think she finally got it when I said that. And so we've been trying to figure out, the best ways to articulate that through social media, in a sense, to garner clients.
No, I love it. I mean, it's so inspiring to me, as I said earlier, like that, those two words of soil coach, they not only wrap together your deep areas of expertise, but that's life saving, that's planet saving, that's people saving. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in so many ways we've talked about, I don't know if you happen to have seen some of the, you probably have some of the reports on how, if we take care of soil properly, mm-hmm. in all kinds of settings, I guess most of the research looks at agricultural settings, we can actually solve climate change, right? I mean, we're not only talking about where water goes and do our houses flood or not. Right. We're not only talking about whether we can grow gardens, but we're talking about like the whole planet and the climate. Exactly. So you say soil coach, and I'm your biggest fan. I get so excited.
Yes. Yeah. The climate change, climate resilience, the climate justice, whatever words you want to use with the word climate, it's going to take us to do it. The solutions are within us, in our communities. What you can do to protect the soil. You really got to protect the soil from the drought, from water stress, from flooding. And that's by making sure that we would hope for native, vegetation to be planted wherever you see bare soil. That would be most important, because that would have the most resilience, right? To prosper and thrive in that soil. And then making sure we're taking care of our trees, because the trees are really important. No matter what anybody says, the trees are about just as important as the soil, because they're going to provide that shade so that it can minimize that drought, right? And minimize that heat that we are feeling, especially in urban settings. We need our urban canopy there. We need that. We need our trees there to help protect not just us and our homes, but also the other entities that also share space with us on this earth. They need that too. So
for sure. Do you happen to know anything about what's currently possible in terms of cleaning and remediating urban soil that's had industrial toxins put into it? Like, I don't really follow that, and I don't have the expertise to understand it. Mm-hmm. Is that something you look at all?
No, I'm glad you brought that up, so that for people who do feel inspired and like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and grow some stuff. I don't like to say people should go get stuff tested, because that inherently says there's a deficit. But at the same time, you definitely want to find out what's in your soil, and not just from a contamination aspect, but from a fertility standpoint, right?
Yeah.
So you do want to find out, does it have the nutrients that's needed for the organisms that live in the soil, and then for the plant's roots, and therefore the plants and the leaves and the flowers that we want to sprout. So you definitely want to look at it that way. But yes, Chara, they do have several ways that they quote unquote clean soil and or decontaminated, or whatever other words you want to put there for soil. And it's for people who live, I mean, it's not even just urban settings, because the rural settings can be just as harsh because of the, agricultural practices of all the chemicals that have been, placed on the soil and the vegetation there. So for me, my advice is, my suggestion is always to check the land use, before buying or living or whatever you planning to do. You can find that just through a search of what was there before your home or building or whatever was there, or especially if you're trying to garden. You want to know what was there, because as I said before, you can't create or destroy matter. It just changes phases and changes the way it looks and maybe smells and feels, but it's still there. So you want to know what's there. But yes, and if you feel like some contamination is happening, whether it's to the soil, the water, or the air, or the air, you can they do have reporting mechanisms for you to, write an email, letter, or call, or a chat to let people know, to let, EPA, because that's the governing body, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to, if you want to report things. And I would say, Chara, people were fiddling around with phytoremediation back when I was in grad school, using certain plants, they can uptake some of the toxicity, some of the contamination in soils. But I think it was taking way too long, of course. And then I haven't really been following that so much lately, but I did have contact with a company in Europe who had some microbes that could break down, if you had an oil spill, they had some microbes that could, detox the soil in those areas. So
that's a good point. I forgot about the microbes, because my question, I'm not a scientist, of course, but my question with the phytoremediation is, so if you pull lead out of the soil, as an example, and it's in the plants, then don't you have contaminated plant material that needs to be disposed of? But it does seem like the microbes might be these amazing invisible saviors of life on Earth. Because based on just the news articles I've seen, it seems like maybe the microbes take apart some of these toxins at the molecular level. Whoa. Right. Oh, and fungi too, right?
And fungi too. Fungi is so important. That's a whole nother interview, Chara, just to talk about fungi and the networks that they've created in the soil. But so what we were talking about as far as the microbes is bioremediation. For anybody who's listening, you could definitely go look that up and read about it. But yes, with phytoremediation, in theory, you wouldn't be growing that particular plant for consumption, right? You'll be growing it for keeping the soil stable, of course, as well as, for uptake. And I would assume, I'm just making assumptions here, that they would be thinking, like with the microbes, that the plants would be changing, I guess, in a sense, transforming whatever they're taking up, so it's no longer in a toxic form. Because if it is outside, of course, pollinators and other organisms could potentially consume that. And so we definitely have to have some protection against that. But people were doing this in the greenhouse, of course, under controlled settings. So as far as branching that out, I'd have to do a little bit more homework, but that's a great question.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes me curious too about the scientific and almost the alchemical coming together. Like if we keep learning how to do that, we could transform some of our environmental toxicity, and
yes,
that would be amazing.
And what would be nice is if the acknowledgement about the contamination, right? That's to me the number one thing that's missing from environmental injustice is the acknowledgement. Well, I did this, so I am responsible for making sure that this land is regenerated or restored. And that's not what's happening. Nobody wants to take, ownership of that. So
I wonder if you want to say more about that. This is an area of awareness for me, but certainly not expertise. Do you think that to some extent we haven't quite yet developed, is it the language or the tools? How should we be doing this? So we can take a vague or a specific example, but a lot of America's land is contaminated. A lot of it is in places where industry has allowed some people to profit and others to suffer and be excluded. You work in this space much more than I do. How would you like to see that happen? That a city says, this happened under our watch over the last century. We, as the municipal entity, we will take responsibility? Or what are your further thoughts on that? Because this is a really big question right now.
It is. For me, just listening, I've sat on several meetings, like public meetings, listening to other people explain or describe what's happening in their communities as it relates to environmental contamination. And basically what they're all saying is that they like some acknowledgement, and then they want you to come clean it up, do something about it, instead of keep, dragging it along for years, for generations of people being impacted by this contamination. So I don't want to go into too many examples specifically, but I can go into a good example. I can explain what that could look like. So there's like Chicago is definitely lots of stuff happening because we have landfills, we have coal fire plants. I mean, we got all types of stuff here, right? We got oil, we got BP in them, not necessarily in Chicago, but right, not too far from Chicago, right? In Indiana. Yep. And so, and then we have, our air quality issues because we're always building something. So the soil, which dust is part of soil. I want to make sure you know that dust is soil, it's always flying in the air. So the air quality here impacts our health, right? And so projects that are going on, I know when I ride past and I see different projects happening where I know that when you do any type of project where you're impacting the water, you're impacting species that live there, when you're impacting the soil, there are certain practices that you're supposed to do. And I noticed that people don't do them, which is if you're digging up soil, you're supposed to cover it, right? And most people don't cover it because the type of storms that we get here and the wind that we get here, we don't want that soil being displaced, right? So we want that protected at all times. And, the amount of injury that people have sustained just in Chicago alone from contamination. I mean, Little Village, which is not too far from my home, you can smell it as soon as you get like a block from the community of Little Village. The smell is horrendous because they have so much industry there. And this is a community that has hundreds of thousands of people who live in this one community. And they've been fighting for decades. Some people couldn't even go out into their backyards because their soil was just that contaminated. Yeah. And so, the acknowledgement of that has never come. And what they're doing, what they always do here in Chicago is gentrification, of course. Now that others want to move in, they're quote unquote cleaning the soil, detoxifying the area, and building new things, raising rent prices, raising housing prices, so that the people who live there are no longer able to afford it. Yeah. So it's just stuff like that vicious cycle of injury and harm that continues on. Even now, even through COVID, we're watching it happen in my own community. Like, the housing prices in relation to, people thought this was a wasteland, and now all of a sudden we're doing all these great things to it and building all these things, and now it's $1 million to buy, a single family home. Yeah. When 10 years ago it was 50,000, right? Yeah. So yeah.
Right. And you see pattern after pattern of disregard for life and a lack of honesty about who is being harmed and how they're being harmed.
Exactly.
And who's responsible, but not willing to acknowledge that.
Right. And I keep telling them acknowledgement goes a long way. The constant lines and circumventing stories and avoidance, it causes people to have ire, right? And the anger becomes something else, and it shows itself in different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's funny, we did a podcast called Guns and Greens with two colleagues that I know. We basically just came to the conclusion that people are malnourished. So they are surviving. So they're making irrational decisions on how they live their life and how they're impacting others.
Oh yeah.
So
well, and I know there's evidence in favor of that. The only description of a study that I've seen was one that really broke my heart. It's several years old, but an academic researcher in the UK started giving incarcerated people a multivitamin supplement, and the rates of violent behavior in the prison went way down because people's brains were working better. And that's just it's beautiful that she did that research, but it's incredibly painful to think about so many people who, exactly as you said, are not living to their full human capacity because they're not nourished physiologically, emotionally.
Right. I was just going to say, it's not just the food, it's the love, the care, the concern, the regard, the support. All that is important for anybody, to feel that love so that they can actually do some great things. They have time. They don't, they can spend their time doing great things versus spending their time trying to survive. Right.
Trying to survive.
So
exactly. Yeah. So you are a scientist, a teacher, a learning facilitator, as you said, a community leader, an expert in environmental and human well-being issues, a coach. It's a beautiful package of expertise that, in my mind, all fits together very beautifully. What do you imagine as what you'd like to keep contributing with these multiple perspectives and areas of expertise that you've cultivated?
Chara, that's kind of what I've been thinking about for the last few months. Like, where do I want to put my energies? Because I've been feeling like I've done so many things. I've put energies here and there, and I don't know. I don't know. Nothing is moving me right now. I thought I had something, but then I was like, okay, well, maybe something else. But I'm always going to be with the soil. So anything that's dealing with soil, I'm always going to have energy and ready to talk about, ready to do, ready to be a part of, advocate. But I think for right now, where a lot of my energy's been going to is this whole, local food system, because I really want us to disconnect from what we are provided in our communities. We really need more power and control over that. And I want us to be more connected with each other as well as the earth, so that we are eating in harmony with the earth, right? With the seasons, for real. And we have, a robust ways of how we are preparing that, as well as more, herbalism versus pharmaceuticals. So, yeah.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm thinking about what's been accomplished so far in Detroit, particularly for food sovereignty and food justice. Detroit's an interesting case because they ended up with a lot of open land. And I do know Chicago, but not intimately to know whether that kind of land availability, I mean, that's not quite as much the reality, or it's really not as much the reality in Chicago, I guess.
Not in certain parts, not in certain communities, there's really no open land per se. So that's why we've been promoting that, the container gardening. So if you got a stoop or ledge or in a house, you can use this, this bag to grow whatever you need, or a couple bags, of course. And then people grow as they, expand their interest in gardening. And we've been trying to think about I've been thinking about and trying to support that, the exchange, right? The true exchange of goods and ideas, right? So, if I'm growing this, you're growing that, how do we, exchange that mutually, for mutual aid in a sense. So that there is, people have their parts, right, in this community. And as we talked about earlier, looking at communities as assets and what are the great things that we have instead of looking at the things that we don't have. Because we got us, and that's all we really need. We have brains, we have fingers and toes, we can make anything.
Yeah.
So that's been clear.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I hear you. And you and I were talking earlier about how one of the problems with the environmental justice conversation is it often doesn't portray everyone as an asset. So I wonder if maybe you might find yourself contributing to shifting some of that language and conceptualization.
Yes, and I have I feel like it's working in some respects, and now I'm feeling like a little okay. So I have some people, but I'm still working on some others, and I'm at the level of a certain level, and I feel like I need to get here with some of the things. So that's why I was telling you, I'm thinking about how do I best articulate how that impacts, people, because the things that we say about people, they, things, how we describe them, how we view them, is how we treat them. The same way about the soil, right? So if we just think of them as filth and dirt or as a non-entity, why would we have, love for them or care for them or any respect for them or any energy that says, I want the best for them? And so if we're using deficit language in every document, all on TV, like when they say the word food desert, I cringe to death on that. Like, I really do. That like hurts my soul when people use that word, because
it's more like food apartheid, right?
Exactly. And it's, when you use a deficit language, it's almost like you're saying it's the community's fault that they're in that position when they're not. It's really because there's been historical things that have happened that created that. Now, my thing is, how do we work with them, not to them or for them? How do we work with them so that whatever the solutions are, they know best. The people that live there know what's best. They've been living there. They know what's happening. They don't need you from another country or another state to tell them, what's right for them and their community. So, yeah.
Well, and that's why I hope that the sovereignty conversation keeps really growing robustly, because whether we're talking in spiritual terms or life coaching terms or about communities or about the soil who deserves its own healthy sovereignty, and the hummingbirds and the pollinating insects. This is a really beautiful lens that ties a lot of this together, that every entity, every being deserves this sovereign self-determination and access full
Yes.
access to
Yes.
what supports its life.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's the same, whether you're talking about people or what the
Or-
water and the soil need, what the birds need, what the trees need. It's
Mhm.
maybe it's all about sovereignty.
I think so. Sovereignty and liberation, and freedom of choice, being able to choose how you want to live your life. I mean, of course, within reason, right?
Yeah.
We don't want you to continue to create harm or cause harm.
Right. Akilah, thank you so much for bringing your vision and your expertise. If people are interested in coaching with you, they can find you at amrootbuilders.com. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That is correct. Thank you so much. Yep.
Okay.
Please check me out.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you want to close on, or do you feel like our conversation is complete for now?
I feel like it's complete. You had some really great questions. Some other things came up that I didn't expect to say, and I'm so happy that the universe and the ancestors provided that energy through me. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. Thank you so much, Chara, for always staying in touch with me and keeping me on my toes. I really appreciate that and your energies, and thank you to your ancestors.
Thank you, Akilah.
Mhm.
This has been a presentation of New Earth One Network, your home for New Earth living. Access information, education, and videos on living from the heart in unity consciousness. Visit newearth1.com.